Hi everyone, Tech Support by RD here. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you some tips that I follow when creating forms with Google Forms. When I make forms with Google Forms, or with any other form builder in general, I want to create documents which are easy to understand and which are unambiguous and easily followed to ensure that the data that I collect from the forms that I make are effective. The form that we will be using today for this demonstration is a contact form that I originally made for for collecting the information of my classmates in our block and or section, and having contact details of my fellow classmates is really important if I need to reach out to them or if they need to reach out to me. And also there are offices and sometimes some teachers who need our contact information, so by having a single contact form ready, I'll be able to provide that information to the people who need them. And yeah, I'm going to be showing you how I structured such a contact info form. Now, obviously, this isn't the exact form that I used. I modified this form significantly to adapt it to a generic layout that we have here. But this is good enough for today's explanation. And before I continue, this does not this isn't exclusive to those of you using Google Forms, although this form was made with Google Forms. Some of the tips here could be applicable to other form builders like Microsoft Forms or Typeform. I believe those form builders have features that are similar to Google's offerings that you can take advantage of. So before I go into detail about those tips, let's fill up this form together. So first is an email address. I'm going to use someone at example.com as an example. Um, by the way, this email field is automatically provided by Google. This isn't something that is provided, that is made manually. And I'll talk about why that's important in a moment. Let's click next. And some forms, they require a checkbox to accept the statement. If I click next, I'm not able to move forward until I agree. So let's click next. And then here is a very convoluted example of a form containing names, how to input names. Now, this form may look convoluted, but by having necessary explanations beside beside the fields, most questions or things or inquiries are already answered because including the format. And another hidden trick is the input validation that I perform. If your form builder supports regex, and that is supported in Google Forms, I'm not sure if it's also supported in other form builders, you will be able to enforce special rules in input, and invalid inputs will be rejected. So if you look at the input guidelines I made, I said that only letters are and single spaces between words are allowed. Names should not be in all caps or in all small letters. No extra spaces at the beginning or at the end of the response, and don't forget to type your name properly. And then notice that you won't be able to submit the form if something's wrong with the things you've entered here. So let's type a last name. So let's try Juan de la Cruz or John Doe as an example. So let's try entering a name per the instructions. So Doe is accepted, or De La Cruz is accepted, but I made that mistake deliberately, and you can see it's complaining that I need to enter my last name in the proper format. So I'll correct that quickly. Remove the capital R and make it a small letter. And as you can see, it's accepted by the form. And I'll type one there as a first name. So I'm going to leave an extra space at the end of my response, or two spaces. It's complaining that I have to fix my name. I'll put two spaces between the name. It's complaining. If I have a single space, it works. If De La Cruz is a single word, for example, it's complaining again. And if I uncapitalize the C, it's accepted. So basically, by enforcing data validation using regexes early on in this point in the form, we do not have to do funky data normalization business, fixing inputs on our end, because we're doing the data validation as early as now. So in this essence, we are requiring everyone to follow the format in order for the form to be accepted. I know this adds a little bit of friction, but believe me, it saves a lot of time whenever we're going to be formatting these forms, the output from these forms into tables, especially when we're going to be importing them into databases. And having extra spaces in the database, doing data cleanup, it's a waste of time for everyone involved. So by doing data validation as early as now, we avoid those issues down the line later. And you'll notice some people could see that, enter last name in the proper format. Now, this is a pretty extreme measure of data validation because normally the built-in data validation for Google Forms involves checking if it's a valid email address or some other. I believe there's if text contains a particular string or if string or anything like that. But by enforcing regex and advanced regex, we are able to enforce these additional policies, ensuring that the data that we get from our recipients meets whatever we need. Now, there's a disadvantage to this method. First off, people people who have names that are unconventional. They have characters that aren't let's say A to Z and including Enya. If they have diacritics in their name, if they enter their name here, it will get rejected. So that's one consideration you need to take into account when creating a regex, is that you need to factor in what kind of names you expect your respondents to fill in. Now, in the context of the form that I made, almost everyone who entered their information here uses Filipino names. And in Filipino names, you have the letters A to Z and including the Enya. I believe no other characters are accepted. Um, but if you're creating this form for users or international users, I don't recommend this approach, especially if you're going to be, because you'll have to be implementing exceptions to different characters. Might as well not enforce a regex. But since this form is going to be filled in by an audience, a known audience, we're sure that we do not have to receive inputs like Chinese names or CJK names, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean names. We're not expecting that kind of input here. We implement the regex to make everyone's lives a little easier. The similar rule is applied to the first name field, and name suffix, it's a drop down as well. Now, some forms they combine the parts into one field, and they leave a format um, as a description for the field. So, for example, in it would be a name field, and you will be provided asked to type in your full name, hopefully following the format. Now, you may be wondering, why did I separate last name from first name? And middle name as well. I'll talk about middle name later. Now, the reason why we did it that way is to make sure that whenever someone is requesting documents with names in a particular arrangement, like first name last name or last name first and first name last, we are able to easily generate without having to rearrange every single name one by one. It may not sound like much if you're dealing with 40 names, but if this form were to be inputted by 200, you will have to only use a single operation to create a new format for names instead of individually editing each and every name. So by separating the elements of the name right now, we are able to meld these inputs into something sensible down the line later. A little bit of extra work now, but it makes our lives so much easier later when we need to create documents based on whoever inputted something on the form. So another consideration when we're creating forms is like the suffix field. Now, normally suffixes go along with the first name. Sometimes it goes along with the last name. But here we decided to use it as a separate field because in our use cases, suffixes go as part of the first name in our systems. However, there could be some people who say that it should be part of the last name. So by separating it, we have the ability down the line later to move the suffix to the correct position. Now, unfortunately, Google Forms does not support a blank choice as a valid selection for their drop-down option. So we need to use a bit of a workaround to convert every none field into a blank when we process the names using our own tools down the road. So by since this is the only option in the list with symbols in it, um, makes it a little easier to be found, and it's a little simpler to handle. I've included some common prefixes, 1 through 10. I'm pretty sure that this is overkill. The most common suffixes, aside from senior and junior, are the second, the third. I've yet The fourth is a little uncommon. Fifth and above, really uncommon. But I believe in the names that I've encountered, it's most commonly junior, first, junior, the second, and the third. I don't even know why I include the first, but better safe than sorry. Let's future proof ourselves. But majority of the time, none is going to be selected here. Now, some forms will have a field for a middle name, and not everyone has a middle name. So typically, you would implement this as an optional field without that red asterisk here in Google Forms. However, there's a problem because there are some people who legitimately don't have a middle name, while there are other people who think that the middle name is optional, but for some reason they forgot to input their middle name. So to delineate between the two scenarios, so to ensure that the people who have a middle name are able to input their middle name for real, and to delineate among those people who have a middle name and who don't have a middle name, this radio option here, the single selection item here, allows allows respondents to choose if they have a middle name. If they choose yes, they will be brought to a part of the form where they're asked to include their middle name. If they choose no, they'll skip that portion. So you might be wondering, why not just leave it as an optional field at the blank? because because we've had incidents where people forgot to fill in their middle name or think that it's not required even though they have one. Yes, it's required, but we do understand if you really don't have a middle name, because we've had cases where we required the middle name field in the form in the past and someone had to input something like NA or none. So I think none could be a legitimate name, or it could mean that they don't really have a middle name. So to avoid any ambiguity when we're data processing, we're making it as an option that you have to deliberately select. If you have a middle name, yes, so I'm going to pick yes here so that we can see the effect. So since we selected yes in that previous item, we are brought to a separate choice where we're asked to provide our middle name. Now, unfortunately, Google Forms doesn't have the ability to perform an inline input, so we have to bring to a separate section, and each section in Google Forms is a separate screen. So same input rules are needed. So let's use Santos as an example here. Um, as a middle name to complete the form. Now, obviously, if this is blank, I won't be able to move forward. But to handle cases where people don't have a middle name, yeah, there's an instruction saying if you don't have a middle name, go back to the previous section and answer no to the previous item. And if I hit next and answered no, I don't know. Okay, it didn't work. Okay, I think I lied. We'll fix that in a moment. I'll fix that in a moment in my demonstration later. And we're brought to the last part of the form here. We'll talk about the middle name part of the form later. So for now, last part of the last set of fields. Now, there's no special validation rules, so they're all in one place. So another example of using a regex, or I should say what regex stands for at this point. The regex is short for regular expression, and this is what we're using to enforce the some of the input rules that we have here. Now, here in this part of the form, it's asking for a student number. Now, in the school I'm in, the student numbers follow a format that contains the entry year and a six-digit number at the end, and there's normally a dash between the two. But the other format is just the whole number itself without a dash in the middle. Now, now there could be people who just for laughs entered something not okay, I'm going to type in a fake student number here, so like 2022 999 876. That could not possibly belong to a real student, since it's a 999 student number. That's just an example. So that's an example of a valid student number at the school I'm in. Of course, the first four digits correspond to a year. So, of course, there could be some people who just for laughs enter a fake student number. Let's say they enter a really backward year, like 1521. And you'll notice that the form is complaining that my student number is incorrect. So I have to enter something like 2000 as a year, for example. It's still complaining that it's not a valid student number. So I have to input the correct year. So let's say a relatively recent year like 2020, and it's accepted. But if I enter a year into the future like 2035, it's complaining. Now, I might be thinking, so the way we structured this particular regular expression is to ensure that the number entered here is a year within a reasonable range for the respondent. So we are not expecting someone who's born in the year 1901 or 1950 or 1800 or 1500 to be able to input this form. So we restrict the first two digits to the 21st century, so 20 something. And the next two digits, we have to reasonably restrict that to a reasonable range of years based on the respondents that we're expecting. So that's another consideration that you have to take into account when creating your regular expressions, your expected respondents to the form. So of course, we are not allowing people to enter something like 2035 as the first four digits, because as of the making of this video, 2035 hasn't occurred yet. But if you're watching this video in the year 2035, that's another factor you need to take into account. You need to make sure that the year that you accept here, the first four digits, is within a reasonable range for your expected pool of respondents. And it just so happens that the last six digits are just a sequential count from 0 and going up. So we allow the last six digits to be any number between 0 and 9. Okay, so I'm going to leave the year to 2020, as in my example earlier. And one more thing, there could be some people who end to leave a dash following the original format. It's complaining, it must be without any extra symbols. And if they mistype two extra digits, they'll erase it. If they miss a single digit, they can type it in. So that's basic validation for a student number. Next is a mobile number field. Now, since this form was created in the Philippines, mobile numbers over here start with, at least when you're calling locally, they start with 09. Let me enter a non-existent number here. So 09, 09, 17 000 00 01, something like that. I don't believe this is a real number. Let's make it all zeros. So this would be a globe number, for example, but I'm not sure if this is a real number because it's all zeros. I'm not sure if that's even a valid number. So just for illustration, so mobile numbers over here should look like this, at least if you're calling within the country, if you're not making an international call to over here. So we start with 09, or 08, and then 8-digit number for the whoever your personal 8-digit number will go here, and this will be for your telco or telecommunications provider. Now, recently, there are now mobile numbers that start with 08 in the Philippines. So you need to accept cases where numbers start with 089 a 9-ish because we're running out of range. So that's a valid number as well. But there are no numbers that start with 07. It will be rejected by our form. So it has to start with 09 or 08, 8, and must have the correct number of digits and no extra symbols. If I add something like a dash to the number, it will get rejected. Now, the reason why we don't allow symbols is to make things life, or spaces is to make lives a little simpler for everyone involved, to make these numbers easily callable. Okay, optional field, if we leave it blank, it will still be accepted, it won't complain, and it still follows the same validation rules as the above field. So, but if I make wrong inputs, it complains that my number is incorrect. So that's a similar field there. And also an alternate email address field. This particular field uses you know uses a similar built-in validation rule provided by Google Forms instead of crafting our own. So we'll submit the form, and there we have the option to edit our response. So let's go to the actual form in the Google Forms editor, in the editor here. We have our response here, over here, and I'm going to be showing you some of the fields here. But first, let's fix one part of the demo because I just changed sections in the form. So this should lead to section 4, and this should lead to section 5. So some people who use Google Forms, they know sectioning, which allows certain parts of the form to be skipped depending on the option they chose. So that's what's supposed to be selected there. I just removed some sections from the form. That's why they were reset to their default values. So that's another tip for those of you creating forms. Please test your forms using the preview feature before sending out your forms to real respondents. Test them internally to make sure that they're working. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the thing that I'm talking about for the past few minutes, which are regexes, or regular expressions. So let's go to this last name here. So in Google Forms, we can enable validation, the built-in validation feature, by going to this menu here and choosing response validation. Whenever this response validation field is visible, the validation rules are enforced, and respondents won't be able to submit the form, or the field, whatever is in this field won't be accepted if it doesn't meet this whatever specification that we have here. So in the last name field, we have this particular regex that I made. I'm not going to go into detail of syntax of regular expressions here, but I'm going to try to give a basic explainer here. So here we select regular expression as a validation rule, and we select that the matches rule. Matches means that whatever is typed into this field must conform to whatever is input here. If it doesn't fit the whatever regex is specified here, or expression was specified here, it's not going to be accepted as a valid answer. This is compared to contains. Now with contains, it's still going to use this regular expression against the input, but if it's able to find a string which matches this expression, even if the rest of the response doesn't really meet the rest of the regex, it's going to be accepting it as a valid response as long as it's able to find something that meets this regex. It doesn't care about the rest of the text. However, by using matches, we ensure that everything in this regex is met for the input to be considered valid. If it doesn't meet this regex, it's not going to be accepted as a valid response. Now I'm going to copy this string because it's too short to view here. I'm going to open a notepad here and show you the full regex here in detail. I'm not going to go into detail on how regexes are made, but I'm going to give you a basic explainer on how this particular regex is formatted. So this regex is basically capital letter, then any amount of small letters, and any combination of this group from 1 to 3 words, 1 to 3 times of this group. So it's basically a space and then another name, following a similar format. It could be 1 to 3. So since this is a last name, it could have between 1 and 3 additional words. So that could words. So if we could have 2 words like De La Cruz or De Los Santos, or up to 3 additional words. So that's a total of 4 words that form part of the last name. Now, I don't know if there's someone with 4 words in their last name, but in that particular case, we accommodate that. In my experience, there's at most 2 or rarely 3 words in a surname, but most of the time there's only 2. So this is a generous field. Now, if this were the only expression that we will place, people with single word surnames like Santos won't be accepted. So we include an or operator here and another expression which accepts a single word instead of just 2 words or more. So that's the gist of this regular expression. Um, for the first name, it's a variation of the last name regex. Let me copy and paste it here so you can see it. But you'll notice that I don't place a number after the name here for the number of words that come after the name. And the reason here is there are some names in the Philippines, believe it or not, that contain more than 2, or even more than 3 words. I've encountered people with 3 words in their names, and I always remember their names, and I use them for testing these forms because it's not common, but there are people, real life people, with more than 3 names in their given name or first name. So I don't put an upper limit to the number of additional words that can be placed. So it could be at least 1. And I also include an or expression here. I believe that this could be set to 0 instead of 1. I'm not sure if it depends on the implementation, but I had to set the minimum to 1. If if a 0 were to be allowed here, we could delete this entire portion and we could accept names that have single words. But I haven't tested that, so I used a separate item here to specify that we also accept names with a single word in them. Okay, similar regex for names applies to the middle name here. It's a similar one to the first name as well. Now let's go look at the student number regex. It's a little simpler, it fits here as well. So this is the syntax. So we start out with a string literal of 20 because we do not expect anyone from the 1990s and below from the 20th century, year 1999 and below, to be able to fill up this form. This is mainly for students. And another policy is to accept digits with range 1 to 2 for the third digit. So years between 2010 and 2020-ish that's are accepted. We don't include number 3 as the end of the range because as of the making of this video, as I've said, 2030 isn't around yet. It's a long way from here. But if you're watching this video several years into the future, you'll just have to change that digit. And the last digit could be any digit from 0 to 9. Now, and the next part is \d, which means any digit, and 6, saying that I allow 6-digit numbers at the end. Now, you may be asking, could it be just can we just delete this portion and make this 7? Yeah, you can. It will accomplish the same thing because as this one, let me copy paste it here in our notepad here. Yeah, so I haven't tested this, but I believe that this expression, for those of you familiar with regular expressions, could say that this will work as well. But the reason why I had to separate the digits for the year out here is to make it evident when I'm looking at it here that the first four digits are meant for a year. So I'll instantly know what the first portion of the ID is for, and the second portion is 4 digits. But if you're simplifying, you could do this instead and will behave the same. But I'm doing it here to make it a little clearer um, to me whenever I'm looking at this down the road in the future. For the mobile number, almost a similar deal. We expect a string starting with 08 exactly, or, which is the vertical pipe there, 09 exactly, then 9 digits. Same for the alternate mobile number and landline number. Last field is an alternate email address. In this case, I'm using the built-in validation rules that Google Forms provides. So I'm using their built-in email because I don't care about the domain at the end as long as it's a valid email address. So by using the built-in preset, I'm able to um, and I'll be sure that whatever email is provided here is something that is a valid email address. Let me duplicate this item real quick and, change this to a URL. So let's say website optional. And we'll just remove this for the moment. And yeah, so if your form builder, or Google Forms in this instance, provides built-in validation rules of its own, use these instead. Um, Makes life a little much simpler. Um, Now, you might be wondering, why are we creating regexes? We can just, use the built-in tools here, like numbers between a range, or length of the input if you're enforcing a minimum or maximum character count. Because with regexes or regular expressions, we get a lot of flexibility. Because I think that behind the scenes, anything that you select here in these boxes are basically just regexes in disguise, or with presets in them. But I believe for number and length, yeah. So by using regex, we can combine multiple of these rules because yes, Google Forms does provide its own validators. Like if we want minimum character count, like if we need more than 8 characters for a response, or if we only allow up to 100 characters for a response, yeah, we can implement it here. And for simple input validation, this works. But the reason why we do regexes is because we are expecting a certain input. A little more effort is needed to craft these. And if they're crafted incorrectly, there could be people who won't be able to submit the form. So this is a trade-off that you need to make. Regexes ensure that the data that you receive is of high quality from your respondents, but you need to take into consideration who will be answering, especially if you're dealing with a very large demographic, especially with people from different cultures. So that's something you need to take into account whenever you're specifying these validation rules. Whenever possible, try to use the generic rules that are built in, because, but here in our case, since we already know what inputs we're expecting from our respondents, by restricting them here as early as now, we ensure quality output that we get from the forms from our respondents. And one more thing, you'll notice I mentioned earlier that I love putting instructions into the form, especially if there are specific instructions, like with separate fields. Don't be shy to include something in the description to describe specific details about the field here. So yeah, those are some tips and tricks for creating your forms and how I do input validation. Hopefully, I hope this video is helpful to you. Thanks for watching and have a great day.